The CPI report, Child Protection in Iowa, is brought to you by Vocal Victims of Child Abuse Laws. You can watch our program here in Des Moines on Mediacom Channel 15. It's aired at 1 o'clock p.m. on Sunday afternoon, and again Wednesday evening at 9:30. And then this tape is also sent to Council Bluffs, Omaha area, where it is aired on Cox Channel 23. You can see it out there every other Thursday. So that's twice a month. It's aired at 4:30 p.m., all on Cox Channel 23. You can email us at vocaliowa@mchsi.com. We appreciate phone calls from parents where we try to help on a one-to-one basis, sharing our experience of almost the last 20 years. We're here to just help you. We're not attorneys. My number is in Des Moines, 515-276-3956. And John's number is 515-282-2672. My name is Don Burgmaier, and with me at the controls is my co-host,
John Harvey, and welcome to the CPI report. Yes, we'll give assistance wherever we can on an individual basis where you're having difficulty with the Department of Human Services. We find that people do have difficulties sometimes in figuring out how to manage their own case. And when you are working with people who are highly skilled at that, who have all the tricks up their sleeve, they know how to interfere, they know how to intimidate, they know how to cause you to do things that you're not required to do. And we want your family to be protected, but we want you to be the primary individuals to do the protecting. In Iowa, there's something called mandatory reporting, and some people get a big thrill out of that because it makes them feel like they're really protecting children when they become mandatory reporters. About every licensed person who has any kind of a task that has to do with working with children is a mandatory reporter. Sometimes I think they're going to be making garbage collectors mandatory reporters before long, because they want as many people as they can, like in the Nazi era, to have as many people as they can reporting to the Fuhrer or to the bureaucracy cases that they can go and investigate and so-called help. We're here from the government. We're here to help. Not really pleasing words. One of the things that the reporters, the mandatory reporters, are required to do, and that is if they have a reasonable belief that child abuse has occurred, that is, child abuse as it is spelled out in the statutes, if that occurs, then there's a requirement on the part of any mandatory reporter to report that abuse. It has to come within the scope of their employment. In other words, a doctor driving home from work doesn't have to report if he sees a child being spanked or something like that, because it has to come within the scope of their professional practice. And they will do everything they can, that is, they being the officials of the Department of Human Services and those organizations which seem to support uh, the department's efforts, want to do everything they can to make this mandatory reporting function look like it really means business. And they will water it down so that it takes virtually nothing in order to report. Here's what I want to say about that. And I think that since I first published this 2 or 3 years ago, they have actually gone into their um, social worker handbooks and rewritten so that it says if you just hear a guess, it's sufficient to report it as child abuse. But that isn't what the statute says. They're misinforming a lot of people and causing them to call in things that are just mere guesses. DHS says report anything and we'll sort it out. One must have the statute says that one must have a reasonable belief that child abuse has actually taken place. Reasonable means fair, proper, just, moderate, suitable under the circumstances. Reasonable means that it is fit and appropriate to the end in view. Reasonable means a rational view governed by reason. A reasonable act is rational, honest, equitable, fair, suitable, moderate, and tolerable. A reasonable belief is akin to probable cause when fact and circumstances within an arresting officer's knowledge and of which he had reasonable, trustworthy information are sufficient in themselves to justify a man of average caution in belief that a felony has been or is being committed. A person exercising a reasonable belief holds that circumstances he knows or should know are such as to cause a reasonable man to believe the report. Does that sound like guesswork to you? Certainly it doesn't sound like guesswork to me. And what they're attempting to tell their employees is that you can accept anything even if it's guesswork. What evidence do you have to show that a child has been abused? In one case, in Calabretta versus Floyd in the state of California in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, it was shown that somebody reported that a toddler said, "No, Daddy, no." And that was their reasonable belief that a child was being harmed. You see, that is not a reasonable belief. At least the Ninth Circuit doesn't believe that that was a reasonable belief or probable cause. By the way, that was so terribly important to check into that 2 weeks later they dispatched a social worker to that apartment.
I can just imagine hearing a child saying, "No, Daddy, no." And some children are just having the time of their life with Daddy, and what they're meaning is, "Daddy, I want more. I love you, Daddy."
Tickling them or
And
whatever.
what does the DHS worker do? She comes in and destroys that home.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they tried to destroy the home at Calabretta's, and they ran into a buzzsaw because the Homeschool Legal Defense Association was in on that case and didn't believe that the social workers had any reason to be concerned. So what evidence do you have to show that a child's been abused? Under no circumstances, if you are a mandatory reporter, should you play detective. In other words, setting out to prove something that didn't simply come across your attention while you were on duty as a professional person. And that duty was directed toward the child that you're reporting. For an example, if you're a sixth grade teacher and you on your way home from school heard about a second grader that was being abused by his parents, you don't have to report that second grader. Being a mandatory reporter does not mean that you're on 911 service for everybody who goes to that school. So let's be reasonable about this reporting business. Report child abuse when it is occurred. When it has occurred, you don't have to prove all the points as to who is at fault or this sort of thing. If you know the statutes well enough, and you should because you're required to have training on how to identify child abuse, then you don't have to report. You don't have to report if you do not have a reasonable belief that abuse has occurred. And in my years of professional work, I have never reported a child being abused. I have suggested at one point that that an abuse be reported because I found that the child, or at least it was reported to me, that the child was in the custody of the Department of Human Services and was being abused by service personnel.
What was the
Yeah.
outcome then? If
I didn't
was there
get
a report?
I didn't get the outcome.
We have had
no,
other
yeah.
situations where it just kind of backfires in a person's face that turns in a report.
That could likely be. I
Just
see.
doesn't seem to pay to ask DHS for help.
I didn't check into it to that extent, but that is as close as I have ever come to doing something that would require the assistance of the Department of Human Services. In that case, it would have to be reported or would have to be investigated by another agency, not the agency that was the offending agency in this case. But if a child is being abused by the Department of Human Services, certainly somebody should take that into account. Well, we're going to move for the time being here to some stories of what happens in court. You see, unless the judicial system is straightened up, it doesn't do us a whole lot of good to straighten up what goes on at the Department of Human Services, because they work together hand in glove to do the things that are happening. In fact, I heard of one judge who says to a social worker, "You do whatever you wish, and I'll cover you with the paperwork." Oh, by the way, I forgot part of my definition here. I better go back to it before I forget. Under no circumstances should you play detective. A reasonable belief is not a whim or a suspicion. A reasonable belief is not a transient thought floating through one's brain. A belief must be based upon firm and legitimate first-hand observations. The conclusions made must be the result of a rational process of valid information. So now, can you get valid information, pump it through a reasonable process of thought, and come to a conclusion based upon what you know about the law that you were taught in mandatory training? If you cannot put those things together and make the call, don't make the call. You're just wasting people's time and causing problems that probably are not necessary. So those are my thoughts on mandatory reporting. I think that mandatory reporters should be respected more than they are, because after all, they're professional people who should be caring for children, caring a lot about children, and being concerned when children are being abused. They shouldn't have to have a law which places a criminal penalty on them and promises civil liability for not reporting. Why in the world do we make laws that require that competent people report? Um, that is part of the way this whole system is put together, and I think it has an awful lot of Nazism in its construction. When you take innocent, well-meaning, professional people and tell them they're going to do something under the law, and if they don't, they'll be criminally charged, and they could face civil liability for failure to do so. Well, we turn to a gentleman by the name of Terrance Walker, who quite often has some mighty good information regarding some of the faulty problems with the court system. Let's talk to Terrance, see what he has to offer on today's program. Terrance.
Thanks a lot for having me on the show again, once again, John and Don. I appreciate the opportunity to share with the folks out there relevant information pertaining to their life, liberty, and their rights. Because as we all know, we all are affected by the judiciary as it respects our life, our liberty, and our rights, because the judges in this nation are the ultimate arbiters as it pertains to those things. I just wanted to also touch upon a few things here. One was the tragedy that happened in New Orleans here the past week. As we all know, that by the time this show airs, it'll be about 2 weeks old. The whole horrific incident with Hurricane Katrina and the devastation that region in New Orleans and Mississippi, Louisiana, the whole Gulf Coast area faced. But I think I don't mean to make light of that, but I think metaphorically speaking, we all are, when it comes to the judiciary, we all are basically victims, and in one sense or another, we've been ravaged by a hurricane, which is the judiciary here in this nation. We're out here struggling and trying to gain our rights, and the federal government is taking too long to act. So what do? We go to the Superdome and go to the Astrodome, only to find that we don't have a home. So just don't want to make light of that fact. But yeah, that was a horrific incident there, as you could see some of the pictures in New Orleans. Did you have a comment, John or Don?
Back to the dome there where they housed. Was that where they housed people? It was in the first place.
Yeah, that's where a lot of the people ended up at first, was the Superdome. In
They
New Orleans.
housed pushed a lot of people into there, and there's a lot of criminal element mixed up in there. And I'm hearing more and more that the girls and young women were drugged to the restroom and raped and killed right in there. And we're not hearing that in the news. Have you heard that?
I've heard a few reports of that.
And then the armed soldiers standing outside where the people want to get out of that murderous situation, and they're held at gunpoint into that building, and then they get killed. Some of them are getting killed, raped, and the government is covering that up.
Yeah.
I mean, one bad thing turns into another nightmare for these people.
Yeah, it's crazy, but yeah, there's a picture of a guy that's swimming. I guess he's trying to walk down the street, but he's swimming up to his neck in water, and then the other guy's getting rescued off of his rooftop at the bottom picture. You can pan down. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's crazy. But I just wanted to reflect on that. I mean, I think that's really there's going to be a lot of lessons to be learned out of that situation. And here's another picture of the levee breach down in New Orleans, where the whole city just got flooded. And then there's a few more pictures underneath that. I think they finally got that plugged this past weekend. Thousands and thousands of homes. That's just incredible.
Very
And then,
unfortunate. Also a health hazard because of the water.
yeah, I've heard they've got E. coli in the water spreading around really rapidly right now.
Yeah, kind of humble homes, I think there.
Is that a boat there with people on it, or what was that?
It's a boat next to a house.
Are they climbing onto the boat? Must be.
It looks like they're trying to see if anybody's in the roof.
There's a motor on
Or the attic,
that launch, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think what they're trying to do is find if anybody's in the attic.
Is that what you call a flatboat, or I forgot what they call them down there in that area? There's a popular name for a boat.
Maybe a pontoon. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not a boater, so I wouldn't know. Another incident that happened this week, past weekend, I should say, as it respects the judiciary, is the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, William Rehnquist, passed away from thyroid cancer this past Saturday, which would be the 3rd of September. He's been a judge, I believe, on the court for about 30 years. Issued a number of opinions, and died in his home, 80 years old. Been battling thyroid cancer for about a year, or less than a year actually. And according to news reports, he basically had a very aggressive form of thyroid cancer, which had left him basically, most people, it ends up killing them within a year anyway. Upon his death, I'd say about 2 days after his death on Labor Day, President Bush announced the replacement of Chief Justice William Rehnquist, announced a nomination for his replacement, however. His name is John Roberts, and we all know Mr. Roberts as being the fellow that's basically already been nominated for the position of Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. However, because of Chief Justice Rehnquist's death and the sudden vacancy, I guess President Bush found it his role to name the nomination for Chief Justice right away. Now, according to some articles, which have been in the news here just recently, by Todd Perham, published in the New York Times, Bush is entitled "Buying Time with Quick Action on Court and a Second Trip to the South." Todd Perham states that the White House has been under much criticism over the delayed reaction by the federal government over and they call it a continuing recriminations over his administration's handling of the disaster and an awkward dance with a Democratic governor of Louisiana over who would command relief efforts. In elevating the nomination of Judge Roberts from associate judge to fill the Supreme Court seat, Mr. Bush acted with typical dispatch and self-assurance to address one of the immediate and unexpected challenges that landed on his desk, perhaps turning it into an opportunity. And I just wanted to also quote from the article on Chief Justice Rehnquist, where it lists a number of his accomplishments throughout the years. he took his seat in 1972. President Ronald Reagan named him in 1986 to be the Chief Justice of the United States. And the article here goes on to state that William Rehnquist began his long Supreme Court career on the far right of the court's ideological spectrum, but subsequent appointments by Republican presidents eventually gave him a working majority that permitted him to accomplish many of his goals, including a greater solicitude for states' rights and the role of religion in public life. He also led the court in cutting back on some of the Warren Court's liberal precedents that favor the rights of criminal defendants. And I just thought that to be very interesting because we basically have in mind individuals here supposedly in the judiciary, as it respects the judiciary and the nominations thereof. We supposedly have in mind people that have principled thoughts on matters and are not coming to the court with a hidden agenda. As it appears to be the case, according to this reporter, this justice had goals. And I don't mean to kick a man when he's down, you know, literally. He's actually deceased, so I'm not trying to make light of that either. But if you come to the court with a goal in mind to limit criminal defendants' rights, favor religion in public life, or to cut back on a previous court's precedents, I mean, although they might be noble goals, I don't think that it is justified because we are supposed to be first and foremost respecting, as it comes to the judiciary, we are supposed to be first and foremost expecting these guys to be honoring the original drafters of the Constitution's intent. That's what we're supposed to be expecting out of these guys, not for any hidden agendas. And I think that in wake of all this, I think that's what we should be pressing upon our legislators to try to ensure that we have in John Roberts those ideals and not some hidden agenda. But, you know, as it always comes to light, they indeed a lot of times have hidden agendas. And I think that it also brings to mind this whole nomination process, which was rather quick, 2 days. I think that instead of criticizing Mr. Bush for being slow to react to the crisis in New Orleans, we ought to thank him for at least being consistent. He took 2 days to cut his vacation short to go down to New Orleans and assess the damage from Air Force One. He also took 2 days to nominate someone for the Chief Justice position after he died. So at least in keeping that 2-day time frame, our president is being consistent. Did you have any other comments, John or Doug?
I had a comment about this whole organizational problem. When you put something together so massive as FEMA and then Homeland Security, and Homeland Security covers everything. In fact, I heard even the DOT is under Homeland Security. You have a massive problem of working out all of the details in advance. Now they want to remove FEMA from Homeland Security so that FEMA can operate pretty much independent of the others. Why didn't somebody in the Congress, why didn't somebody in the administration, why didn't somebody somewhere come up with a clever idea that wasn't a clever idea? If it was good enough to pass through Congress then without somebody coming up with the idea that maybe this won't work. Now, as I understand, FEMA does not wield any authority. FEMA only is um, a gopher type of organization. They will go for anything that the governors and the sheriffs and whatever other local people ask for. If the sheriffs are having a terrible time keeping law and order, then they can go to FEMA and ask for assistance from FEMA. FEMA is not the activist type of organization, nor was it ever intended to be that. Um, the only problem is if somebody doesn't bark out some orders, then you're going to have a few people dying. You're going to have some people trapped on the rooftops and in the attics. And if somebody doesn't bark out some, but they should, no matter what all these problems are, they should have known that when they put the organization together and should have told the local folks, look, this is the way it works. If you don't like the way we've put it together, let's go and reconstruct the design. Because we did things like that in systems analysis. Whenever we put a system together, we went through various scenarios. And while we knew that there'd be holes, even though we went through and checked things out logically, we knew there'd be holes in the system one way or another. However, the holes should never be so large that you could fly a 747 through them.
Yeah.
Is the way we operated. So you can scrutinize the whole system by very careful design and very careful analysis of what a walkthrough would do if this happened, if this happened, if this happened. Apparently, they didn't do that with FEMA and Homeland Security. So we may be seeing some struggles as a result of very poor planning at the topmost level.
I had a question to ask you
Okay.
before you get too far. So they put FEMA under the wing of the Homeland Security.
As I understand,
So they just basically made another bureaucratic level
yeah.
that they would have to go through.
And when you have bureaucratic levels and you
Yeah.
don't have a clear understanding of the responsibilities and the mandates to each level, then you can blame people. If FEMA didn't respond as fast as people thought they should, if their tanks weren't there, the helicopters weren't there, when the people hollered for a helicopter and it wasn't there immediately, or wanted to jump into a boat and it wasn't there because FEMA didn't have it there. FEMA responds to the demands of the locals. The locals say, well, we've dispatched all the boats we have. We need some more. So call FEMA and get some more. So FEMA is kind of like a service organization that will be a backup to local service, which I think is a good idea. What also interested me is you showed something that looked like an atomic energy plant. They call it their Coliseum or their Metrodome or whatever. In the last few days, I've heard we've got to have a new one. They haul all kinds of trash in there, and apparently people who of not really civil behavior lived in that place and trashed it like people once in a while do, poor citizens do, and then all of a sudden they want a new one.
I think part of the problem was they had toilets that didn't flush.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of like a biohazard zone. Like now, instead of a Superdome, it's called. I guess it's a biohazard dome now.
You bet.
So it's a new phase in recreation, I guess nowadays.
Right, right.
Sports entertainment.
But I think
But
we need to call upon our leaders when they come up with a proposal for a new organization to have that thing so well thought out that nobody has any questions about who's in charge, what their authority is, and how they can utilize their authority and their resources. And if you have a situation where we're getting some static, for some
getting
reason.
some static
Yeah,
or
yeah,
feedback.
you bet.
This
Not
makes
feedback.
me remember the old saying: the bigger they are, the harder they'll fall.
Yeah.
The bigger the government gets, the more problems you got, and the harder it'll fall.
And then also, I think when you give an organization responsibility, you'd better give them the resources and the authority by which they can execute that responsibility. Once you've given them the authority and the resources and their mandate as to what their job is, there should be no excuses for not getting the things done that need to be done. They should have gotten in there, locals or somebody should have gotten in there to do something before CNN got their trucks.
Cameras rolling,
Yeah,
rolling.
yeah.
You think that's kind of why they seized the boat? I noticed they seized the boat from CNN today. I was watching CNN, and one of the correspondents was saying that the military declared martial law and just seized their boat and said we need to use it.
That's right.
Um, think that was sort of backlash from that.
That could that could well have been.
But to make another analogy, like you said, using systems analysis, I actually used to be a programmer, and I noticed in my field, back in the days, in programming field, when I was in that field, if you didn't get something to work just right, then the program wouldn't work. I think that, you know, the logic has to be there, and that's what kind of escapes us as it comes to administrative or judicial fields, because the logic doesn't have to be there all the time, and that's what you get, something that doesn't work. Um, Here they supposedly Federal Emergency Management Agency. You would think they could manage emergencies. That's what their name is. Yet, in fact, when it came to the lines of communication, obviously weren't there. I don't know. The governor apparently said that they called upon the federal authorities, or the governor of Louisiana said that she called upon federal authorities, and then the Federal Emergency Management Agency guy said that he didn't hear anything from anybody. So, we've definitely got to break down in communication somewhere, and someone's not telling us the whole truth. But
Oh, was that the email I forgot to open up and read?
yeah,
Oh, was that? Did you put that note on my desk?
it doesn't make
I
any
didn't
sense.
read it.
It would think that you would think that something as important as a federal management emergency management agency and the governors of each state would have some sort of protocol established whereby they would know how to proceed if something to this level of catastrophe arrives. But obviously not. I don't know what's going on.
In
It just,
1920, I understand they had a flood down there also. Just wiped everything out.
yeah.
Also, while I've got the camera over here, I wanted to make a couple other comments that's not getting into the news. There are a lot of churches getting involved to help in the situation that Hurricane Katrina left behind. The big churches are opening their doors, and allowing people to come in. The little churches across the country are shipping semi-loads, truckloads of household items, things for the the needs of the people. They're shipping them down to the big churches to dis, what's the word, dispense or something like that, out to the needy people. And then, John, I overheard you say that the homeschoolers across the nation, the families, are opening their doors to the homeschoolers that have lost everything down there. So that gives a place for homeschooling families with nothing to come to get under a roof and to be in a good home. Uh, so God is taking care of his people in a lot of ways that way.
Yeah, there were two churches here locally. I remember they mentioned on the news the other day. It was the True Bible Baptist Church and Elohim, and we got to see one of our cohorts, John the Third, on the news. He was actually welcoming the people here, and I guess he was helping out volunteer as the some of the families. I think there was about 7 families that came up here from the Houston area. I guess they went to Houston first and found they were out of room down there and came on up here to Des Moines. So yeah, good looking out, John the Third, if you're watching.
Okay. Very good. Well, yeah, this is the way that uh, it's good for the churches to offer their assistance. In fact, I think as we try to figure out what's happening with this mismanagement, if there is mismanagement in government and the organizational problems here at the government
we know
level,
that with all our dealings with DHS.
if that the churches are being counted upon to provide all kinds of assistance to these individuals who are homeless. You speak of a homeschool. This is an ideal situation because it doesn't make any difference where those children are who are homeschooled families. Their homeschool will actually go with them, no matter where they are. And as I understand, there are some efforts now to deliver that homeschool curriculum by computer. So they can have the very best instruction no matter where they are, getting their instruction through use of the computer. The state of Louisiana will not be holding school this next year, this coming year. They have shut down all efforts toward educating their people this year.
The
Are you
whole
talking
state?
about the public schools, John?
That's correct. So
What about all the kids that aren't going to get educated? What's that going to do in the future?
They'd better sign up for homeschool.
So the whole state, or just
For the whole
city?
no, this is as I understand, this is for the entire state. I could be
Wow.
mistaken on that, but
Yeah, I imagine it's probably going to cost a lot to fix New Orleans if in fact they do. I guess they're planning on it because they look like they're moving in there, but it looks like they need to do something with the whole levee system. I think it's poor planning to have something that I've heard the people talking about it the past couple of years about these levees around the whole city and what if, and to hear them talk about it so much, and then this to happen after the fact, it's just poor planning. If you know it's a problem, be proactive about it. But I guess people in our government are so inclined to be managers by crisis, and that in turn leads to disasters like this, this magnitude occurring.
One negative thing about New Orleans, there's a lot of gay parades, gay-minded community down there. So that, and then here up in Des Moines, we resist something like that, or a lot of people do, not everybody. But then we're going to ship up a lot of these people that may be gay-minded and saturate our community, and I guess that's my 2 cents worth on that.
okay.
I don't know anything about a gay population, or I've heard of San Francisco.
It's bad. I understand in New Orleans. In fact, they organize every year on Labor Day, and I heard today that it's going on right now. The floods knocked them out, and they didn't think they were going to do anything, after the hurricane came through. But I heard that It's going on full force. And John, you talked about the French. French, what is
French
it?
Quarter.
Quarters, and what's that for?
That is a cultural center. That has a lot of cultural heritage to it. But the going back to the gay presence there, they did hang an appropriate name on their gathering down there. They called it decadence.
Oh yes, that's what it's
So
called. The gay group is the Decadents,
uh-huh.
decadent
They're
gays.
celebrating. They're celebrating decadence, which is probably an appropriate title. Well, we've slipped away a little bit from the courts to some of the social issues. Well, maybe the social issues will wind themselves up into courts. You see, the state of Louisiana has lost much of its tax base. A person whose home is going to be destroyed and the contents and everything else ruined, the insurance companies are going to have to pick up a lot of that. But a lot of people are not going to rebuild in that basin, knowing that the basin could be another pool, a cesspool, next time this happens. Uh, and whether the government should be rebuilding uh, any kind of town or city, metropolis, 6 feet under a flood stage, um, I'm not sure that the citizens of the United States should greatly contribute to that. And they're talking about $200 billion subsidy, 200 billion being twice the um, output of the state of Iowa. So it'd be two twice the output, the annual output of the state of Iowa, just to pick up the costs of rebuilding Louisiana. Now that Delta area is an important area for the rest of the country, and I think that they certainly should make certain that that is maintained. Otherwise, the rest of the country is going to have some real problems.
Shipping for one, the Gulf ports down there. There's boats come in and transport grain and whatever else. I'm not sure, but
Oil.
oil. And it's very
Mhm.
important. Ties into the rest of the United States.
You bet.
So
Well,
they're going to get those shipments rolling as fast as they can. And I
okay.
understand in the next 2 or 3 days they should have barge shipments moving out of there.
Okay. I want to touch on a topic that we've talked about in the past 2 or 3 weeks. Uh, we looked at some of the things that causes the DHS to take an interest in your family. It's like putting up a lightning rod. You may draw lightning. And some of the things that we do as families and as a society actually creates the need for the Department of Human Services. Does that mean that we should quit doing some of these things? Well, there's some of these things that need to be straightened up in order to avoid uh, the kind of adverse attention that we're getting from the Department of Human Services. It costs all kinds of money to maintain that huge organization, to care for the needs of individuals who are having problems. One of the biggest problems that causes the intervention and causes DHS to give attention to the family is the breakup of the family. Do you know that 2/3 of all of the child abuse reports arise from uh, the breakup of the family in custody and divorce issues, where sometimes even the spouses are each throwing accusations back and forth at each other? Well, the Department of Human Services loves that kind of attention
It gives them
because
a foot into the door of those houses.
it certainly does, and they can be the kind of people that say we're here from the government, we're here to help. Well, yeah, they're here from the government. They certainly are not always the most helpful.
They're here to
So,
destroy, aren't they,
so,
John?
so as long as we fail to get it together as far as keeping the family together, we're going to have some interest shown by the Department of Human Services, and they know how to get their hands into the state treasury to draw the money necessary to do what it is they want to do with broken families.
As well as the federal till.
That's correct. And in one case, they even hired a gentleman to write grants, just going around and looking for places to find more money. And they seem to find money that requires that they do this and this and this. So they're actually operating at state expense to hire their staff, and then they're getting grants for additional funds to spend willy-nilly the way they wish, and following the dictates of the grantors, the ones who are coughing up the money.
That'd be the federal taxpayers.
That's right. Well, this is from private nonprofit organizations
Oh, okay.
that, in a sense, we're supporting them because they're not paying taxes. They're giving all their money away, so they don't have to pay taxes. And Procter and Gamble and Casey Foundation and so forth. They're nonprofit foundations. Well, another one that is looming very large, particularly here in Iowa, is the drug trade. And so long as there's going to be drugs, and they're going to be used in the fashion that they're using them now, we're going to find some real difficulties, because they're going to use use the presence of drugs and find some way of linking that with some kind of neglect of the child. And once they can get their foot in the door, then they can start shaking their finger and saying, this is a drug abuser, this is a drug abuser, let's take the children away from this drug abuser. It doesn't make any difference if they're attempting to solve that problem themselves or to get counseling. They will do everything they can to, especially if they have a marketable child. Now, if it's a disabled child or a child of color or something, they may not be quite as successful. But if they can get one of those blonde, blue-eyed little babies, they'll use the drug trade or any other scheme to get that child away from the parents and put that child on the market. Because the resources from the federal government are being provided for that kind of activity, for foster care and for adoption. It is not available, and there's no rewards given to the fine social worker who finds a way of giving that child back to the mother and dad, or to relatives who can watch over that child while parents are.
So it's like a racket, basically.
Oh yeah, it's very much a racket that's going on here. So as long as we have that drug scene and breakup of the family, that's going to provide a lot of care by the Department of Human Services. It's going to cost all kinds of money for court cases. It's going to cost all kinds of money for assistance, for staffing the Department of Human Services, for looking into cases of abuse where abuse does not occur, for doing all kinds of silly things that shouldn't be on the scene. It doesn't really help anybody to engage in these family breakups and to engage in drug abuse to the extent that the Department of Human Services wants to come in and alleviate all that difficulty. All there is to make real trouble. If the department has some real good stories, I would like for you to send them over to me so that we can review them. And because from my perspective, they're a trouble-making agency. Next way that you can make sure that you get the attention of the Department of Human Services is send your children to the public school. Especially get them well acquainted with the school counselor. The school counselor is a person that children can tell their sad tales to. They can tell the teacher and the counselor how they're being treated at home, the fact that they're being spanked when they'd rather not be spanked, that they are humiliated when they don't get their work done. The mother even raises her voice at them at times. So the counselor does a real good job of engaging these people, these students, in conversations which wind up being child abuse reports. Spanking a child in public is a good way of getting attention of the Department of Human Services. Now, while I'm not going to tell you to never to spank your child in public, because I think that when punishment follows immediately the display of temper or whatever, I think it's best executed immediately. But if it causes the department to take an adverse view of what's going on, you better find some other time to spank the child. Leaving a child in the car while you make bank transactions or you pick up a pizza, that's a good way to get attention. Signing up for the WIC program or for Hawkeye Insurance Program, good way to get their attention. Placing your children in foster care as though it was a babysitting service is a good way of getting the Department of Human Services.
But many parents
attention.
do because they need help, and it looks like a good way to get help, but the end result is disaster.
It sure is, and we've seen all too many cases where that is occurring, and it's a sad commentary.
Go to your friends, go to your church for help.
That's right. Certainly don't go to the Department of Human Services. And here's one that may surprise you, particularly coming from me, is, did you know that if you decide to homeschool your child, you're held in suspicion? Because homeschooling your child is considered, even by members of the General Assembly, as a way of ducking out and getting away from the Department of Human Services. And I say, maybe that is a good idea, to get away from the Department of Human Services. Why should they have to tolerate that? Well, here's some numbers that you may be interested in contacting in case you have difficulty with the Department of Human Services.
Or the courts.
Or the courts. And we'd be only too happy to assist wherever we can. We're most appreciative of the privilege that we have to come into your living room and to talk about things that are of interest to you, the family and its protection.